This is episode number 165 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast, one of the shooting world's biggest gun talk programs. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, law enforcement, and the firearms industry. But before we get started, here's a quick word about our sponsor, the R7 Mako by Kimber. The striker-fired R7 Mako is a high-capacity polymer micro-compact from Kimber. With the R7 Mako, you get 12 and 14-round total capacity from flush and extended magazines, while the performance carry trigger has the smooth pull and clean break you'd expect from a high-end single-action handgun. The R7 Mako also comes optics ready, or you can have it with optics already installed. Kimber's R7 Mako will feed your appetite for something different. See how at r7mako.com. Today, we've got a very interesting and information-filled episode as I talk to Erick Gelhaus, the editor of AmericanCop.com. Trust me, being an editor isn't any big deal, but Erick is much more qualified than that. He's an instructor at Gunsight Academy in addition to having his own training company, but even more importantly, he's spent decades pointing guns at bad people during his law enforcement and military career. A lot of that was during low light conditions. Now here's Erick Gelhaus talking about why you need to be carrying a light source right now. Well, good afternoon, Erick.
Good afternoon, Brent.
Thank you for joining me in 2023. It feels weird to say that now.
It does. So you haven't cleaned up after Christmas yet, though?
No, not at all. The house looks awful. Well, today we're going to start a new year off and talk about something that I know guys hate when I say expert, but you're a freaking expert, and I'm going to say that whether you agree or not. But you are very well versed, shall we say, in the concept of lights and lights in firearms, fighting with lights, everyday carry of lights. And when this topic crossed my mind, I knew there was only one guy I wanted to talk to, and that was Erick Gelhaus.
Thank you. Going off the court definition of an expert, yeah, okay, I will admit that off a court definition, I probably am, because I do know more about it than the average person does.
Exactly. Well, as we were talking before we got started recording, this is a giant pet peeve of mine, and I don't have too many pet peeves. The Oxford comma drives me crazy, and people that don't carry lights. That's an inside editor thing, but truly, the light thing makes me crazy. And I'm not saying you have to have a weapon light on you, but I'm telling you, you've got to have some kind of light. And I generally carry two. One, a small EDC kind of light, and at bare minimum, either a second one or something on my keychain or something. Even those little nickel size single LED, that aren't super bright, but as people have proven, if the power goes out, say, 9/11, you can get down a whole bunch of stairs when it's pitch black with using one of those little things. So that is kind of the thrust of today's talk. Is we're going to talk about why it's important for folks to carry a light. And if you're not doing it, start tomorrow. Otherwise, shame on you. So, Erick, I've just got off my soapbox. Your thoughts on the subject?
So the first thing I'll throw out is just kind of to double tap or build up your position. My wife was at a retiree luncheon some years ago, and the power goes out, and she reaches down into her purse, pulls out a Surefire light that she'd repurposed, i.e. stole from me, shines it down at the table and goes back to eating. And she gets why are you carrying that with you? And she's like, who's my husband?
Exactly. So
having the lights there, and it's not just for going and looking in dark holes for bad people with guns, because decent, normal human beings don't have to do that stuff. It's for getting out of a building. You mentioned the power outage, but how many of us have walked into a parking garage at 12 noon and the damn thing's dark in there and you're trying to figure out what's where and everything else?
Exactly.
So, have it for all those things. You live in tornado country. I live in earthquake country. And different sets of natural disasters that could put you in a place where the power is out and you can't necessarily see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just on the day-to-day side of things.
Let me interrupt you there. I was just flying back 2 weeks ago, and somebody lost their cell phone underneath the seats of the airliner. And of course, we're all packed in there like sardines, and people have stuff underneath the seats and all that. And other people, including the flight attendant, were trying to look under the seats using the flashlight on their cell phone, which is adequate. And then I pulled out my little Streamlight pocket USB and lit things up, and everybody's like, "Oh, you are the king of flashlights." And we found his phone. So, and that's broad daylight at 35,000 feet, but it was just dark enough underneath everybody's feet that the cell phones weren't getting it done. So there's just a million plus 5 possibilities for why you need a flashlight.
Absolutely.
So you teach low light technique. You've written on it. You teach at Gunsight. You've got a private training company. So where do you begin when you're talking to students in a low light class? What is concept number 1?
So the big thing is, what are we using lights for? And there's a bunch of different things, but the biggest one we use them for in the self-defense world is to identify threats.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that shape? Is that thing that's moving, whatever it is out there, is that causing me or my loved ones a problem? Claude Warner, who goes by the tactical professor on the internet, Claude used to be the lead instructor down at the Rogers Shooting School, does a lot of work on negative outcome events. Claude's numbers are somewhere on the far side of 95% of the time you hear a bump in the night in your house. It's not a bad guy. It's a family member. It's a drunk neighbor.
Yep.
It's somebody with some sort of developmental issues from a couple blocks away, right? So long before you're grabbing a gun, popping safeties and aligning sights, you need to be illuminating whatever that is, whoever that is, with a flashlight to rule out the possibility that they're not somebody who falls into one of those 3 categories. So that's the first thing, is we're using them to identify. We're using them to navigate, right? How do I get from point A to point B? That's a lot of the power outage thing. You're looking around at where are we going to go next? What are some of the other issues in there? You can communicate with them. Hey, I can shine a light on a door, on a wall, on a bush, something like that. I need you to take a look at this. So it's identify, navigate, communicate, right?
Yep.
We're using those. Next thing is kind of how we hold the light, how we manipulate the light, right? Because that's the mechanics side of it, which doing a podcast setting kind of doesn't lend itself to doing mechanical techniques, right?
Right.
I'm going to talk about lighting conditions, right? Is it full sunlight outside, middle of the day in summertime, or is it pitch black and it's that almost no moon? Those are 2 radically different lighting conditions. One, I need light. One, I need to bring light to. The other, I don't. But what if you get into that situation where, it's nighttime, but you've got a full moon out and it's clear, so you got all the stars? You're going to see a lot more stuff than if it's that pitch black night. And then the weird one for us humans is that dusk to night or night to dawn transition. They call it diurnal transition. And that's where the world goes from shades of gray to light, or light to shades of gray. And you start out being able to see everything real well, and then you just barely see movement off to the side. So I'm going to hit on all those things, kind of talk about some of the science about how every 13 years, the amount of light you need doubles. Yeah. So, let's just say, for example, we take that 25-year-old kid coming out of the police academy. They've got pretty good eyesight. They're great for working night shift, right?
Yeah.
Well, by the time they're 38, they need twice as much light. Their sergeant, who's probably 51, 52 at that point, right, needs 4 times as much light as that 25-year-old does. Wait till you hit 65. Because now you're up to 6 times the amount of light, right?
Yeah.
And then you start, as you get beyond that, now we start to see why folks have problems driving. So talk about some of the science on that, how the eyes work. Depending on who I've got as students, depends on how far I nerd into the science on that. All right. If I'm talking to instructors, I'm going to go deep into it because they may not need to teach it, but they may need to explain it to administrations, to attorneys, to juries, whereas the end user doesn't necessarily need all the nerd science side of that.
A lot of stuff there. And, it seems on the face of it pretty simple, but it's a science into and of itself.
Yes.
Well, let's back up and let's go into the practical application. So probably the number one that is like the hot topic right now is, do you have a light on your gun? And I would say at this point, the majority of cops do.
Mm-hmm.
Both of us started back in the day where you learned the Harry's technique or some of those where you took your stream light and, cleared your areas with your gun and your stream light or whatever. Now it's a great thing. They've got lights on the guns, but the big question, especially for us, quote unquote, normal earth people who don't have to go after bad guys on concealed carry. Mm-hmm. Do you carry a light on your gun?
I have, but it's not the general rule for me in concealed carry,
mm-hmm.
right? Especially now in retirement. I far more often do not carry with a light on the pistol than I did when I was still working. I worked swing shifts up until my last night of retirement, so I was going home at 1 or 2 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
My off-duty gun was a mid-sized version of my full-size gun, and they both had lights on them because I was going home at night.
Yeah.
In retirement, my concealed carry guns rarely have one, but I've always got a handheld with me.
Yeah.
One of the things that folks forget, and cops forget this too, is that weapon-mounted light quickly becomes a gun with a light attached to it,
mm-hmm.
in spite of people thinking that it's a light with a gun attached to it, or forgetting that it's a light with a gun attached to it.
Right.
And remember rule 2, never let your muzzle cover anything you're not willing to destroy. Well, if I'm not using the spill of the beam or the outer edge, if I'm using the center of the beam and that muzzle are in alignment.
Yeah.
And if I'm using the center of the beam, that muzzle's pointed wherever the center of that beam is. And not only do I risk violating rule 2, but I risk violating some of the state statutes on brandishing or assault with a deadly weapon or some other term, because I've got the light out, but can I justify the muzzle being in the same place that light is?
Yeah.
So having the handheld light makes a big difference. Now, my nightstand gun, pistol in the house, that's
mm-hmm.
got a light on it.
Mine too.
But it's also got a handheld light next to it.
Exactly. In my drawer next to my bed, I've got a Glock with a light, and it has a laser too. And I've got a handheld flashlight there because mm-hmm. 2 is 1 is none.
Yeah.
And so forth. So I assume you carry a smaller LED powered light on your mm-hmm. person. How do you carry? You carry it in your pocket? You got a belt clip?
I carry it in my pocket. So we talked earlier about the little, nickel-sized battery cell lights. Those are great on keychains
mm-hmm.
Or on zipper pull tabs. I used to always have one on my plate carrier if we were trying to figure out door locks and things like that.
Yeah.
But now it sits on the key ring or clipped to a shirt pocket or something, right? I'll have a flashlight. Usually these days, it's kind of some combination of mod light, cloud defensive, or Streamlight, just because Streamlight's got a dual fuel one that will run off like a AA or a CR123 battery with a pocket clip on it. I can just throw in a pocket.
Yeah.
So I've got a light that puts out more than enough light in the environments I find myself in as a retired guy, where I'm not out looking for bad people, but it gives me enough light to make that don't shoot decision.
And this can kind of lead into technology, because we both witnessed, the D-cell mag light, and then we had krypton bulbs and all this fun stuff. And now these little tiny lights have more lumens or output than any of those big lights ever did. So it's kind of an arms race now. This one will burn your retinas completely out, and it's only the size of a AAA cell. So what do you look for in the one that you carry on your person most of the time?
So the first thing I look for is where's the switch?
Mm-hmm.
I want a switch that I can activate with my thumb on the tail cap. So I want to be able to hold it like an ice pick, which is how I always held all my lights when I was working, with the switch underneath the thumb at the back of it. I want it to be able to fit my hand, right? Because if it'll fit my hand, I can probably throw it in a pocket, keep it on me.
Right.
The days of carrying a full-size SL20 Streamlight or a Kel light or any of the other big rechargeable impact weapons, those are gone. Those are long gone for me. I got them, but I don't.
Yeah.
I want something that not only has the lumens output, the bright output, but I want something that's got candela in it, which is the throw. So for sure, I need to be able to fill up a room. Whatever room I'm in, within reason, right? Like a ballroom at a hotel probably is too big. But if I'm in a hallway, in a bedroom, in a living room, an office space, I want to be able to turn on a light and have that light illuminate that space. In a parking garage, give me several parking spaces at least. I want to have enough lumens to do that. I want enough candela for the throw to be able to push that light down some distance, right? Preferably a battery these days that's rechargeable. Now that I'm back having to buy all my CR123 batteries, right? Rechargeables are really good. But
and let me interject there. The rechargeables have gotten really good.
Yes.
That's pretty much my thing now, is even these tiny little ones, they are rechargeable and they work. They, used to rechargeable batteries were good for about 3 times and then they just started dying and that was all. And now they've got that technology to where they really work. They're easy to charge. They hold a charge and they don't get the memory to where they don't want to recharge the 2nd or 5th or 10th time.
Yeah, I can charge stuff while I'm teaching down at gun site, come back 3, 4, 5 months later, pull the stuff out of the foot locker I keep down there and the batteries are charged and I can throw them right in the lights and go to work.
Exactly.
So yeah, I like the stuff there. Preferably a clip on it or the ability to put a clip on it so it'll drop down into a pocket. Raven Concealment made a really nice one. I know they're redesigning it. A company called Therm, THYRM, makes one out of plastic for some other lights. It just clips in the pocket, gives you something to hold on to. So I like having that on there. What I'm looking for lumen-wise, if I can get on the far side of 750 lumens, I'll take it. But candela-wise, I'm wanting something at least 50,000 candela out there. The lumen, everybody now, like even Everready, when you go to buy a little headlamp at the hardware store, will tell you how many lumens it is, but it doesn't tell you how far it throws it.
Right.
So that's just kind of one of the things that we've written about in American Cop in some different articles is different capabilities. And I'll just segue real quick. I did an article for American Cop where I took a number of lights into the shoot house down at Gunsight and set up a 3-dimensional target about 15 yards away and used the lights in the afternoon, then came back down once it got pitch black into the night and did the same thing, same lights, and then paired those photos together so people could see how the light worked with some ambient light and how it worked with no ambient light side by side.
Yeah. Good stuff. Now, let's get into a rather contentious topic at times, and that's the whole idea of switches and multiple levels and, all that. For my way of thinking, and I'd be interested to see what you say on this, but to my way of thinking, I like on and off just because, especially if you're in some kind of stress-filled situation, should I hit 3 taps, 5 taps, 17? And back when blinkers were the big thing, or strobe they called them, I think we've all at some point, wanted some white light and you flipped it on and it came on strobe, and it's like, I just want some freaking white light to illuminate, the guy that's injured or whatever, and you get the strobe. So my big thing is just keep it simple, on and off. Yeah. That's all we need. But what's your thoughts?
So I like on or off. If it's got a momentary switch capability in between where I can push it and it doesn't quite go to constant on and I can release it and it goes off, fine. But on, off, done with that. I went to the Surefire Institute back in the late 90s when Ken Good was running it. And Ken was probably the first proponent of the strobes. If he wasn't, he was pushing it really, really hard. But all his strobing was done manually. He was making that light blink with his thumb or his finger on the switch. That gave you the ability, if you chose to do it, to go that route. Right? The problem, I think, was when you had companies start making the mechanical strobes in the lights, and it was now a feature, a design feature, and that thing would just suddenly appear. I've got a video that I shot a few weeks ago I haven't done anything with, but I was doing a video with a weapon-mounted light for American Cop, and I pulled a light out of my pocket and turned it on, and all of a sudden it's strobing and I don't need it. So I just took the camera and put it on the strobing light and that's why strobing lights are a bad idea.
Whatever can go wrong will.
Right. Yeah. Well, that video will pop up at some point.
So the follow-on question, though, is do you think it works? I mean, I've not used it a lot. I've tried it a couple of times. They were just coming out as I was ending my career, but it's a compelling theory, and I suppose in certain circumstances it might work, but I just don't feel like it really gives you that much advantage. But what do you think? Because you're the expert.
Stop. So I will tell you the way Ken Good and Barry Duke did it with the Surefire Institute, where one of them would strobe you and the other would flank you. It was very effective. I never saw it work in the field when guys tried it with mechanically strobing lights. I'm not opposed to it. I wouldn't have a light that did it mechanically.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it, go pay attention to what Ken has said about it, put out about it, and learn to do it with a light yourself rather than having a light that does it when you need it to do something else.
Yeah. Well, and it's like anything, if you practice it a lot, especially with a partner, I'm sure it could be very, very effective. And that may have been part of our problem is, we didn't necessarily believe in it and we tried it once or twice. And it's like, this just added another layer of complexity when we didn't need it. And so it didn't work. So don't take my word as gospel, those of you out there writing poison pen letters. But I just personally in my life, I didn't see that it ever made a huge difference. So anyway, moving along from there.
I will say that every time I see a light strobe, I tell people the 80s in Germany is calling you back to their disco.
This is Sprockets. Now we dance.
I was stationed over there that I can say it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's circle back into pistol mounted lights. We've already talked about a lot of police officers on their duty guns carrying in a holster. They've got a light on them. A lot of times you and I have pistol mounted lights on our guns that we have around the house or whatever, but not necessarily on your concealed carry gun. But there's more to than just mounting an optic. Almost said optic. Mounting a light on your pistol of whatever flavor and use it is.
You still have to learn how to work it without muzzling people that don't need to be muzzled, right? Mm-hmm. More likely than not, you're going to have a handheld flashlight in your hand, trying to identify, trying to navigate, doing whatever it is you're using the light for. When you realize the situation has devolved to the point where first you want a handgun in your hand or a long gun, and then you're needing to go to deadly force. So you probably ought to know how to shoot one-handed and do that fairly well, because one hand's going to be tied up with the light, at least initially, the handheld light. Then you're going to go to how are we going to turn the light on the pistol? Mm-hmm. And I know there's folks whose hand size is such they can just reach forward with their trigger finger and hit their rocker switch. I can't. I got short, stubby little fingers. Okay, so great. So I would hit it with the support side thumb, except for the fact that my support hand's holding on to a light, right? Or now I'm trying to hold a family member, move a family member, open a door, and do all these things. Surefire has done a great job having the remote switches. I put my first pistol light on a work gun for duty in 1999, and it had their remote switch that went back to the grip panels on my 1911. Every Surefire light that I've used has had that remote switch that comes back and connects on the frame. I don't use the rocker switches as much, except for demonstrations, because I do have short fingers and it's hard for me to reliably hit the rocker switch and not risk getting near the trigger guard. So I prefer something that has a rocker switch on it. Some of the new smaller streamlights, like the TLR7A that I've been using on a concealed carry gun, it's not a rotate left or right, up or down. It's a push in to make the light come on. So now I'm just asking my finger to go straight forward. I'm not asking it to move or swing in different directions. I'm a little more comfortable with that push in with either my trigger finger or my support thumb than I am at sweeping at something and risking missing it.
I was just thinking, I remember seeing, and you probably did too, that at one point, and I believe it was an offshore company, thought a pressure pad on a trigger was a good idea. Wow. That didn't last very long.
I think I info dumped that just from the sheer stupidity concept.
It's all out there, kids. Just because they bring it out doesn't mean it's a good idea.
No.
No, when you talk about push button lights, most of my pistol lights are rocker switches. And this is going back to my biases when carrying especially long guns. We had remote switches too. And even though they were name brand, they tended to break after a while, or they got dislodged from the gun and caught and broke and those kind of things. So I've always kind of been just use the switch on the light itself. I do like on carbines and pistols, long guns, things like that. I just like the straight push button and don't worry about getting a remote switch. But again, that's kind of personal preference. And I know the technology has gotten so much better, but that's just one consideration, though, that if you're going to use a remote switch, it better be a good quality one. And you got to understand what happens if it quits working or gets dislodged or something like that.
And the whole topic of switchology is something that I don't necessarily think a lot of people consider. Coming from both the law enforcement and the military side, where I either had white light on all my long guns, or in the military, I had white light and infrared light and infrared laser designators, all of which had different switching.
Right.
For them, it was, okay, I run a pressure pad for this, and I run the button on the device for that, or I run 2 pressure pads on one piece of, okay, stop.
Yeah.
The light goes on and off with the thumb or with something physically attached to the thing that holds the light. The laser gets activated by a pressure switch somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, that's how I keep it straight. Now I just have to deal with white light. Now it's either push in or push a switch that's attached to it, with one exception, and I will set some of my shotguns up where I have the ability to activate it from either side of the forearm in case I have to do something weird with it, right? I can do it with my thumb or with my fingers. This
is kind of a niche kind of thing, but what's your thoughts on pistol mounted lights that have the laser? Because like the one at my bedside has a laser, and I've got it set up so that they both activate. And I'm learning. Tom McHale is getting me to learning to love the laser. I'm not a complete convert, and I don't think it's the end all be all, and people are kind of lazy and try to use those in place of sights, which is not really the way to use it. But I do see the situations where it is handy. So what's your thoughts on the light laser combo?
Where the laser shines, no pun intended, is disabled shooting, where I can't get the sights up to eye level.
Exactly.
Right. Whether they're iron sights or optics, if I can't get them up to eye level, the ability to identify where my gun's oriented is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
You got to accept the wobble, right? Because that laser is going to move a lot more than you think your iron sights did. From there, the next question kind of becomes, all right, what distance do I zero it at?
Yeah.
And how do I do zero? Do I do an intersecting zero where the laser and my line of sight with the optic intersect? Do I do an inline or parallel zero where my sights and the laser stay the same distance apart all the way out? Right. And then I just have to remember that way, if I have to take a headshot across my king size bed, that light is however many inches below where my sights are. So the laser is however many inches below where my sights are. So if I'm aligning off of the laser, I have to offset for that.
Yep.
That's kind of the only concern. It's just, once you get there, how do you set it? How do you zero it, and then ensure that it stays zeroed, and then train with the zero? It's not like a laser on a rifle where you could easily have a converging zero where the sights and the laser cross at, say, 100 yards. Right, because we're not using the pistol out to that far. So
great thoughts. And that's with mine, it is zeroed at, I forget how many feet. I measured it from my bed to the door, because there's really no shots I can take beyond that. So I figure, and the reason I use the laser in that particular instance is exactly what you said, that I may be really behind the power curve by the time I wake up. And it may be, I've just got chance for throwing that gun up there. I may already be, engaged or something. I don't know. But I just felt like that was a good place for that. So,
and there's nothing wrong with that, except that with how low that laser sits in relation to, because it's below the light, which is below the frame, which is below the barrel, which is below the sights.
Mm-hmm.
Be conscious of where, if you have to take a shot at double that distance, where it's going to go.
Right. Talk about holsters. You got to have a big holster if you're going to have a light on your gun. And typically that's why you see them mainly on duty guns. But talk about some holster considerations.
So the good news is we're not trying to modify holsters anymore. Right? The 80s, it wasn't bad. Once we started seeing lights coming out towards the end of the 80s, Safariland was starting to make, and Blocker was making holsters that would take the lights on the guns. Safariland changed their molds over time, and it made things a little bit more difficult for those of us that like using the remote switch. They no longer mold for those. U.S. Duty Gear has fixed that. They're bringing back the molds that have the channel for the remote switches. That's the cop world, right? Then Blackhawk does the same thing with their T-Series holsters. For the decent normal human beings, you're just going to want to reach out to whatever holster manufacturer you use and make sure that they can support it.
Mm-hmm.
So I happen to buy a lot of my holsters from JM Custom Kydex. Tony was up in Reno. Now he's down in Texas. When I tell him I need a holster that will support this combination, he can build it for me. And sometimes that's a light and a remote switch. Sometimes, like with this Streamlight TLR7A I've been working with, It's just the light itself. I don't have to worry about any weird switching on it. So I would want to make sure I had a holster manufacturer that could support it.
Well, shifting gears completely, I was just sitting here thinking about another aspect of the topic we're discussing. That is vehicle lights. My vehicle is outfitted with multiple firearms and multiple lights, and I have one that it's got a wide beam, wide spread. It's more of a utility kind of light. And then I've got one in the door that it is actually a varmint hunting light that will reach out way out in the ditch. And, if I'm looking for something or somebody, which fortunately I don't have to do anymore, but I just have that capability that I can reach way out there. So your thoughts on vehicle lights and what you carry?
Okay, so you're talking about lights carried in the vehicle versus the headlamps.
Right.
Okay. This is where Mod Light and Cloud Defense have done a really good job of coming into the industry and churning out lights that'll do that. Both of them make general purpose lights that have good spill and decent throw, and both of them make a very high candela head. Mod Light's the OKW. On the Cloud Defensive stuff, they call it the high candela head, oddly enough, that have some pretty significant throw. So you've been down a gun site. Hannikin range is the first pistol range you come to driving down from classrooms.
Right.
The shed is right about 50 yards from the firing line. There's also a flagpole there. Mm-hmm. There's probably about another 35 yards from the farthest back firing position to the road. I can stand at the firing line with either of those high candela headlights, not only illuminate the Raven at the top of the flagpole at night, I can illuminate the trees on the far side of the road going out the back. And I'm just not just saying pushing light out there. I'm saying pushing enough light that I can go human being, facial features, and to the extent that my eyes can see what that person's doing, with lights that have that high candela, which gives you that throw. Now, what that means, though, is, too, if I try to go inside a house with that light, I'm going to get spill, but I'm going to get a narrower beam, because the narrower beam is what close is what gives me the ability to throw that light really far out.
Yeah.
So that's where you kind of have to look at, kind of weigh it, right? Do I want a general purpose light, or do I want a light that's got a lot of reach? So, like, I still work court security for my old sheriff's office. The light on my pistol will definitely give me enough light inside the room. My handheld light has the throw to go down any of the hallways in the courthouse, go down the length of the courtrooms, because we've got some old built in the 1960s courtrooms that are really deep from front to back.
Right. And when you're talking to students or just people about flashlights and what to look for in a flashlight, what do you say not to pick a flashlight? Because there's a lot of them on the market.
Not knocking any of the stuff that's in a hardware store, right? But that's going to be a task light. Mm-hmm. So if it's for defending my life or somebody else's life, or going and looking for bad people, I want a name brand that's got a track record on stuff. If I've never heard of the brand, right, I'm going to be pretty leery about wanting to use it as a defensive light. I want something that runs off a commonly available battery, be it rechargeable or be it a put in and use till it's gone. I want a tail cap switch. I don't want to switch on the side of it, right? And that's because of how I hold lights. The different ways I will work with a light, that seems to work the best for me. I don't like strobes. We've already talked about that. I don't like general rule, I don't like multiple light sources within the reflector.
Right.
So I want one LED, one bulb, but not 2, 3, 12 inside that reflector. I'd want something that's to a degree impact resistance, because let's face it, we're going to drop it. I'd want a way that it would stay in my pocket. So I've mentioned Mod Light, Cloud Defense, Surefire, Streamlight. If I didn't mention Terralux, I've used their lights in the past with good luck. Those are 5 companies that I would all have positive things to say about. Not that anybody else is bad, but there's companies that I just don't have as much experience with to be able to say, can recommend their stuff.
Yeah. And cost. I mean, It's all over the place, but if you see a $4.99 quote unquote tactical light with a can opener and a zip line and, a whistle and all this stuff off of Amazon, might want to stay away from something like that.
Yeah, I would dodge that. Probably something for a defensive light that you're going to you're going to hang your don't shoot decisions on. Probably you're looking at least $100 for a decent light that's going to do that.
And, when people ask me about lights, what I've found, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, all these lights, even the $4.99 light from Amazon will work, and they may be bright enough, but where they start falling off is day 2, month 2, week 5, 6 months down the road. You've dropped it now twice. The high quality lights will survive that kind of day in, day out abuse, whereas the cheap ones look good out of the box, and that's probably the last time they're going to work.
I've got a little Terralux light that I cannot count the number of times it has gone through the washer and dryer. And
I'm not the only one.
Well, on the far side of double digits.
Yes.
That it's gone through the wash over the years. Light still runs. A headlamp that I actually have up on my forehead or hanging around my neck while I'm trying to look in the backseat of the truck for something at 2 a.m, or God forbid I have to help out with some sort of medical issue in the middle of the night. I don't care if that thing works at double arm's length because I'm not using it at double arm's length. Right. I do care about lights that I have to make other types of decisions with.
Exactly. Well, Erick, this has been a fascinating talk, and it's great hearing your opinions on lights and their uses. Tell us a little bit about Erick and what all he's got going on, because you're a busy guy.
A little busy. So I'm the editor over at AmericanCop.com magazine. We would love your support. Not only come over there for the articles. It's not just cop stuff. We're trying to do things not only for law enforcement, but for the decent, normal human beings, the prepared citizen, right? Prepared resident who wants to be able to take care of themselves and their loved ones. So there's plenty of material there. As mentioned, I teach down at Gunsight. I've been teaching down there since 2000. Fortunate enough to do that. And then my company is Cougar Mountain Solutions. It specializes kind of in low light pistol mounted optics and shotgun work for decent normal human beings in law enforcement. I can be found on all the social media stuff for American Cop and for Cougar Mountain Solutions. And if you're trying to find me on the web, specifically on the website, it's AmericanCop.com or CougarMountainSolutions.com/blog. But you can hit American Cop and Cougar Mountain on Facebook and Instagram by those names too.
There you go. Great stuff. Well, Erick, I know you have to go back to court, unfortunately. I have no such...
Paid to go to court. I'm working. Let's clarify this.
We do appreciate you talking to us, and we will talk yet again, I'm sure, in the future on the Guns Magazine podcast. So thanks for joining us.
Brent, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure as always, and I like talking to the folks that listen to us.
Erick Gelhaus gave us a bunch of great information on everyday carry and weapon-mounted lights. This is one of those episodes you may want to go back and review because Erick shared so much good stuff. If you like this episode, you absolutely want to go back and check out episode number 41, where Erick talks about surviving the narrative after a shooting he was involved in. Additionally, I'd suggest you check out episode 103, where Erick talks about how to transition to a red dot pistol optic, or episode 143, where I make the claim you don't know jack about the Weaver stance. If there's a topic you want to hear, someone you'd like us to interview, or you just want to share your thoughts, please drop me a line at editor@gunsmagazine.com. As always, you can find us on your favorite podcast directory, such as Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and several others. And also there's YouTube, and of course at gunsmagazine.com. You can also subscribe to the companion Gun Cranks audio podcast on those same directories, or you can watch it at the Gun Cranks YouTube channel. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and of course our numerous special editions available for sale on our websites and at Amazon. I'd also like to remind you to check our sponsor, the R7 Mako by Kimber. Visit them at r7mako.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.